Okay, let's write some text. So this section is going to show us how to write to a text file. Please do read over the material here, but I'm going to show you really quickly how to write to a text file. It's really quite easy to do. First, you open the file. So function call open the file. The first parameter is a path. It can be relative or absolute path. Here it's going to see temp. I'm actually going to just write it to the same folder that the script is in. So if I don't provide anything in the way of a file path and I just provide the file name, it's going to go to the local folder. Now the extensions are really important. In this case I'm going to do it as .txt, which tells everybody it's an ASCII text file. There's different ASCII text file formats, but we'll talk about those in a little bit. And then notice here I've got a character, single character, small w. That indicates we want to open the file for writing as opposed to reading, which we'll do later. And then I'm going to write some text into the file and then I'm going to close it. So I go ahead and run that, save it. Okay, it doesn't appear to do much, but if I go over here, yep, there's my test.txt file with the word hello in it. Yay! And again, this is very easy to do. And one of the things you could do is set up an index and write a bunch of times. Okay, I'm going to do that. Boom, computers are fast. Now when I look at my text file, oh look, I've got a whole bunch of hellos. So what's missing here, as we talked about a while ago, is we've got to put our /ns in there. So those /ns are new line characters. And if I add those in, just replace my while loop with it. Okay. And then write out the file. You will see that each one of the strings that I write out appears on a separate line. Now you can't see the /n here, but it's actually there. It's in the file. Okay, there is a /n in the file, a character that represents a new line. That's what the n stands for. Okay, and there it is. If we take that out, we just end up with one big line, which is usually not what we want. Okay, notice I'm also closing that file each time before I go back into Wing to run again. The reason for that is this little notepad text editor is pretty easy to work with, but programs like Excel and ArcGIS will hang on to your files to the bitter end. If you don't close the file after you've viewed it and then you go to run your program, you're going to get a permission error because Arc or Excel are holding on to it and not letting you write to it. And often you actually need to close the package to get that to free up. Okay, again, good material here to read through, but let's push on. Okay, the most common type of file we use by far when we're writing out stuff is CSV files. CSV files stands for comma separated value, but you'll never really hear that, and I won't put it on a quiz, I don't think. CSV is what everybody uses, and everyone knows. And so here I'm going to write out a little test.csv. Notice nothing has changed other than I'm putting in numbers. And then I have our /ns as before. And everything else is the same. Oh, and I should mention that I did change the file extension to .csv. That's important because Excel opens .csv files. Oops, that's a different file I was working on with Python. Okay, so here's our little file that we created with our numbers. And Excel opens it like it's a table, and you can put in a heading and you can do all kinds of other things with it. So very easy to write them out, a little bit trickier to read them, more on that later. Okay, so let's go ahead and do a larger one because that will be fun. Whoops, should probably pull those off the website. If you want to use a temp file, temp folder, off of your C drive, that's fine. Some of you won't be able to create that temp folder. You'll have to do it on the desktop. So I'm moving things to that. Now notice what we've done here. We've done an index. We've looped 10 times, used format to convert that. Now we go ahead and open up the second CSV. In Excel, you'll see we've got a series of numbers, which is cool because not only can we do 10, but we could do 1,000 or 10,000 or a million numbers. And we can do all kinds of math and everything, dump it into Excel into a CSV. And then we can even open that up in ArcGIS or Blue Spray or QGIS, and suddenly we're generating data from Python that we can then do spatial operations on. So pretty cool, and do it in massive numbers. Now, this gets a little bit trickier, so hang with me through this, okay? Because this piece of code writes out a series of rows, right? So here's our row counter. We're going to go row by row. Here's row plus 1, okay? So there's a loop here, just like we've always done before, a while loop, where we go through and set row equal to 0, while row is less than 10, so we're going to write out 10 rows, and then down here, we add 1 to our row counter. Inside of the row loop, and for each row, we're going to write out a series of columns. Okay, so here you see another column equals 0, while column is less than 4, column plus equals 1. So this inner loop is going to write out a series of columns for each row. In other words, each time it goes through a row, it's going to write out a column. And I'm going to go ahead and, let's see. First, let's run this so you can see what it's doing. Did it work? Oh, I forgot to change file path. There we go. Run it. Test 3. Double click. Goes into Excel. Okay, now you can see we've got multiple rows, and then within each row we've got 4 columns. Now you could view this as columns, but when we're writing out in code, we're writing the row, and then we're writing each column in the row. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that with breakpoints so you can see what's happening, because this is an important technique for a number of things. Oops, there's that error, permission denied, got to close Excel. It'll happen to you, it happens to me all the time. Okay, so if we single step, notice that we're going to go in here. We're writing our first row. If we look at stack data, there's row 0, column 0. Okay, and then we're going to go through and we're going to loop through our column, writing columns 4 times. Okay, so we're writing each of the columns within the row, or each cell within the row. We do that, and then we go to the next row. So now we're on row 1, column 0. So we've gone back to the first column. We're writing that one out, then we write out the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and then we go to the next row. So now we're on row 2. So it's a loop within a loop, which means it's going to go through this outer loop 10 times, and each time it goes into the first loop, it's going to go into the second loop and write out 4 times. Play with this. Some folks struggle with this because it's a loop within a loop. It is important in GIS. We're going to use it this week because it's also really cool. Okay, so typically we also want to have a header. So this is a more realistic kind of example than what we were just doing. Okay, stop, run. Okay, and here we've written out a file, and we've written out a first header line for latitude and longitude. Okay, and then we go over here and we look at what happened in our file. And you can see we have latitude, longitude, and then each of the latitude values, each of the longitude values. One of the things we'll be doing this week, I highly recommend doing this before you turn in your assignment, is load this into ArcGIS. Blue Spray and QGIS are very flexible when it comes to these header names. Can have a bunch of different stuff in there, but Arc requires them to be 10 characters or less and with no punctuation other than underscores. Don't ask me why it's not part of the shapefile specification, but they limit it to that for shapefiles, and same thing for CSVs. So if you can't load it into Arc, it's usually because of the header line. Okay, but this is the format that we'll use for spatial data that's text data that we'll load into ArcGIS or any other GIS application, and also R and lots of other packages that we use. CSVs are really the interchange format when we're programming. Okay, and of course, we can add other columns for different attributes, and we can add lots of rows for lots and lots of data. Okay, so play around with that. This is just a sample, and you load it up and you can actually see that it does do spatial data. Okay, now that's how to write CSV files without using the Python CSV library. Okay, this is optional because it's pretty easy to write CSV files. I do recommend that you use the Python CSV library to read CSV files because reading them can be much more complicated. When you go to read a CSV file, you don't have control of what's in it. So it's best to use the library for that, in my opinion. Okay, so using the standard CSV library is pretty similar. We import the CSV library, we do an open, and then you create something called a writer. Okay, so this is a new object. Here we've got our file object that we had from before. And here we create a writer using the file object. Now there's some parameters here. You can change them if you want. This is what I always use. So it just says to quote non-numeric, which means if it's a string, it's going to quote it. If it's a number, it won't. And then here's a line terminator, which our end of line character or new line character /n. So this is what I always do. Okay, and here we write a row using the writer, and then you can see we've got an array where we've got, in this case, 3 strings. This is actually our header line because it's the first row we're writing out. Okay, so a serial number, person's name, date of birth. And then you can see we've got a number. Okay, so it doesn't need quotes. And then we've got our string, and then we've got our dates. So, and then after we write everything, we close the file, we're good to go. So this is fine to use, or you can do them yourself like we did in the previous example. This might guarantee more compatibility with CSV files, but the standard's pretty stable. Again, when you go to read them, I highly recommend using the CSV library because it'll take care of all kinds of weird things that I've seen. Oh, and then this is something one of our students showed me how to do. You can actually kill Excel if you want to do that inside of your program.